Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm so honored to be here, to stand here on traditional Mohawk territory, and am really privileged to have this opportunity to share a few ideas with you today. I've certainly learned from many visits in different First Nations communities the importance that elders hold in those communities. And today I've accepted the role of elder with an enormous sense of responsibility. You see, I think elders play a very special role in the dominant society because we're no longer having to kiss someone's backside in order to get a job or a promotion or a raise. We don't have to play that game anymore. We don't aspire to fame or money or power. That's all behind us. And so we can now speak. We're obligated to speak the truth from our hearts. And if that offends people, that's their problem, not ours. I speak today as an individual, not on behalf certainly of First Nations, but not on behalf of any organization, any political party or group. I speak on behalf of my grandchildren. Perry wanted me to speak of climate change and renewable energy. I'm sorry, I'm not going to do that. I listened to the news on CBC this morning, and if you heard that broadcast at 6 this morning, you'd swear that the Greek economy or the Chinese stock market decline or the price of oil are the greatest crisis facing us today. Meanwhile, the forests are burning. The rain is not falling. Huge algal blooms, toxic blooms, are now choking the oceans, and carbon levels in the atmosphere are now at catastrophic, unprecedented levels. As you've heard from Chris Henderson on the panel, there are enormous opportunities in clean, renewable energy, and I've got nothing more to add to that. This is a moment of enormous opportunity. I don't believe that we lack for solutions to our global eco-crisis. The critical hurdle is not economic. It's not technological, it's not even political, it is psychological. It is the way that we see the world, the perceptual lenses through which we look at the world, and in turn that shape the way that we respond to what we see around us. If you were to look and compare the anatomy, the structural anatomy of the brains of people around the world, if you were to look at the structure of our sense organs, the way we receive information from the world, if you were to examine the electrochemical properties of individual neurons, you wouldn't be able to distinguish these from one group to another. You couldn't tell a male from a female. You couldn't tell any ethnic or racial group on the basis of these structures because we're one species and they're all built the same way. And yet, if you were to ask an Arab or an Israeli about Palestine or about Gaza or Jerusalem, you would find very different responses. Ask a businessman on Bay Street and a street person on Bay Street about the economy or about welfare. Ask a man and ask a woman about love, about family, about sex. The differences in responses, even though all of our neural circuitry is the same, you'd think we came from different worlds. We see the world through perceptual lenses that are shaped by gender, ethnicity, religion, social class, and so on. And for me, the major clash of these perceptual lenses is between Indigenous perspectives and urban industrial society around the world. There are many of those in the urban industrial society who think that Indigenous perspectives are primitive, who think that they're impediments to modern development, or that they're simply romanticized notions of the noble savage. I have a very different take on this. So, as a scientist now, I want to tell you that scientists can now use DNA, the genetic material, and trace the movement of human beings across the planet over time. And all of the trails lead back to Africa, 150,000 years ago. We were born as a species in Africa. And I can't wait to give a lecture to the Ku Klux Klan and tell them we're all Africans, for God's sake. What's your problem? That was our birthplace. And as the population of those two-legged naked apes increased, we began to move. We don't really know why they moved out of the grasslands of Africa, but we did move out. No doubt some were young people searching for adventure. No doubt some young testosterone-driven males wanted to go over the mountain and check out the Neanderthal women because we bred with the Neanderthals, you know. But probably we began to deplete resources in the area we were born, and we had to move in search of resources. And as we came to new lands, moved out of our birthplace, we were an invasive species. We found resources there. We had no idea the nature of how you sustain them. I mean, we came into many areas, and here were these slow-moving, big, dumb mammals, and even with spears and clubs, we were able to capture them, and man, they provided a lot of meat. And you can, in fact, follow the movement of human beings out of Africa with a wave of extinction of the easily taken animals and plants. We extinguished them because we didn't know about sustainability until at some point populations were left with a critical question. We're running out of things that we took for granted. Now, what do? Well, we either move on looking for more somewhere else, or we stayed and had to live in a different way. And all over then, we began to have pockets of people that said, we're staying. And they stayed and celebrated a few successes. They suffered failures. They made mistakes. Those were hard-won lessons that were passed on to each generation as an accumulated body of knowledge that told people how we could live in a sustainable way. Over thousands of years then, that body of knowledge became the priceless body of indigenous knowledge that will never be duplicated by science. That knowledge was deeply rooted in place. The recent wave of exploration, occupation, and colonization of the past 500 years began the spread of a radically different worldview. It spread a search for resources and opportunities. My grandparents were part of that wave of exploration and colonization. They left Japan between 1902 and 1906 and came to Canada in search of opportunities. To them, they knew that their future was hard work to earn money, to buy land. And that land and everything on it represented their opportunity for wealth. My parents were born in Vancouver. My dad in 1909, my mother in 1911. And like all of the other Japanese Canadian kids born around that time, they had no grandparents and they had no elders. They were still back in Japan. And like the new occupants of lands all over the world, in Australia, New Zealand, in Africa, in North and South America, the wave of colonists had no roots to the old country, had no roots in the new land. And so they came with a radically different way of looking out at the world. If everything is a resource, there's no room for the sacred. If everything is to be exploited without regard to past or future, we create the kind of world then that we now confront, a biosphere in crisis. Human beings, you see, have suddenly, very suddenly, become a new kind of force on the planet. We are now the most numerous mammal on Earth. There are more of us than any rat or rabbit or mouse. I was born in 1936 when there were 2 billion people on Earth. Imagine, in my lifetime, the population has more than tripled. This is unprecedented in history. And every one of us has to be fed, clothed, and sheltered, and all of that comes out of the earth. And we have an enormous ecological footprint. But in the last 100 years, we've seen the development of virtually all of modern technology that we take for granted. We've seen the growth of an enormous appetite for stuff. We love to shop. We love to consume, and all of that comes out of the earth, and we have a global economy now to service that demand for stuff that comes from all over the world. And when you add all that together, our numbers, our technology, our consumptive demand in a global economy, we have become a new kind of force on the planet. We are altering the physical, chemical, and biological features of the planet on a geological scale. That's why scientists today refer to this period as the Anthropocene epoch, the moment in geological time when we are the dominant force shaping the properties of the biosphere. The Truth and Reconciliation report, to me, shows that there was a deliberate attempt then of these new colonizers to snuff out Indigenous people and their culture, which I believe was the attempt to crush the Indigenous perspective, the attachment to land, the 7-generation perspective that are so important or such an impediment to development. And that's why I'm here to say your struggle for dignity, for recognition of sovereignty over land, for your millennia-old cultures is my struggle for my grandchildren. You are leading my battle. You are leading my battle, the battle of all who care about a future for the coming generations. And I support you all the way to gain rights over the land. I commit to trying to indigenize the psychological perspective, the lenses through which we now, the now Indigenous world, we have to indigenize the psychological lenses through which we, the non-Indigenous people, use the world and see the world. All that I know has been generously taught to me by Indigenous people that I have met around the world. And now, as was mentioned in the introduction, I have Haida grandchildren who live on reserve in Haida Gwaii. So I have even more of a commitment and something to be grateful to for the Indigenous world. I've been involved in environmental issues since Rachel Carson published her book, Silent Spring, in 1962, all about the unexpected effects of pesticide. And when her book came out, there wasn't a single department of the environment in any government on the planet. The word environment simply didn't mean what it means today. And there were huge advances made after her book came out. Departments of the environment were set up at all levels of government in virtually every country on the planet. We saw laws passed to protect air and water and soil, and we saw millions of hectares of land protected as parks and reserves. And we, environmental activists, celebrated many successes. We stopped dams. We stopped proposals to drill for oil in sensitive places. We stopped supertankers from traveling up the British Columbia coast. But 30 to 35 years later, we're fighting exactly the same battles again. And those in British Columbia know that we stopped the dam at Site C on the Peace River. We stopped the drilling for oil in Hecate Strait. We stopped the supertankers from Alaska going to Seattle. They're all back on the agenda now. We haven't changed the lenses, the paradigm in which we are acting and making decisions. What's the point of the fight? We're fighting about tankers, we're fighting about pipelines versus trains, we're fighting about what kind of energy future we have, when we haven't even agreed what the important things are that we must protect. We've got to all agree, it seems to me, before we begin fighting these issues. And so I'd like to suggest that we need a platform of agreement on which we then build the negotiations over our future. we all have to agree, we live in a world that is shaped and constrained by the laws of nature. In physics, we know that you can't build a rocket that will travel faster than the speed of light, and nobody objects to that. We have to live within that. The law of gravity says we can't build an anti-gravity machine here on Earth, and the first and second laws of thermodynamics tell us we cannot build a perpetual motion machine. Those are dictated to us by laws of physics, and no one objects to that. You have to live within those constraints. Chemistry is the same. The atomic properties of the elements, the diffusion constants and reaction rates all tell us what kinds of atoms we can get to react and produce new kinds of molecules. And we live within the constraints dictated by chemistry. And in biology, it's the same. Biology tells us that every species has a maximum, optimum number that can be maintained by an ecosystem or a habitat. It's called the carrying capacity of an ecosystem or a habitat. Humans are not confined to a specific habitat or ecosystem, but the biosphere is our domain. That's what we inhabit. And there are limits. There are absolute limits of the number of human beings that can be sustained. Of course, the number is determined by how much we consume per person. If you're a Somalian or a Pakistani, you can pack a lot more humans onto the planet than if you're living like we do in big cities of Canada or the United States. But we know carrying capacity of habitats or ecosystems dictates optimum numbers of a species that can be sustained. Also, biology informs us that we are animals. Years ago, I gave a lecture in Austin, Texas, and there were a lot of kids in my audience. And I said, now kids, if you remember one thing from my speech today, don't forget we are animals. I couldn't believe how pissed off their parents got at me. Don't call me an animal, I'm a human being. And my answer to that is the same as Paul Ehrlich's. If you're not an animal, are you a plant? We're all animals. And our animal nature dictates some things that we cannot escape. What is the most critical thing that every human being needs as an animal? If we don't have air for 3 minutes, we're dead. We don't even think about that. What a fine line we walk between life and death. 3 minutes without air and we're dead. If we have to breathe polluted air all the time, we're sick. I would have thought any intelligent creature, knowing how critical air is, we would have put air up there as the highest priority to protect. Air ought to be sacred, for God's sake. And then you think about it, each of us is 60 to 70% water by weight. We're just a big blob of water with enough thickener added, we don't dribble away on the floor. But the body leaks water, right? It comes out of our skin and our eyes and our mouth and our crotch. We lose water all the time. So we got to top up with water. If we don't have water for 4 to 6 days, we're dead. If we have to drink polluted water, we're sick. So I would have thought that water, like air, would have been up there as a sacred element that we all have to protect for our own well-being and survival. Now then, of course, some of us could survive a bit longer than others, but if you don't have food for 4 to 6 weeks, you're dead. If you have to eat contaminated food, you're sick. So can we put food up there along with air and water as our most sacred elements? And most of that food comes from the soil. Sorry, do I have enough time yet? Okay. And finally, every bit of the energy in our bodies that we need to move, to grow, to reproduce, all of that energy is sunlight. Sunlight captured by plants in photosynthesis, converted into chemical energy, and we then get that energy by eating the plants or the animals that eat the plants, and we store that energy in our bodies. And when we need that energy to move or whatever, we burn it and liberate the energy of the sun back out into our bodies. So I would have thought photosynthesis is something up there with air and water and soil. Those, as you recognize, are the 4 sacred elements that Indigenous people around the world recognize come out of Mother Earth. that gives us birth through earth, air, fire, and water. And then those to me, and those things, clean air, clean water, clean soil, and clean energy, are delivered to us, are cleansed, are replenished by the web of living things around the world. They're created by life itself, which is what Indigenous people have taught me are relatives. And genetics, modern genetics, confirms it. The plants and animals we share the planet with are our genetic kin. And surely we treat our relatives with greater respect and care than if they're simply resources. To me, these are the fundamental platforms on which we must now build a way of living, of having an economy. You see, they are the fundamental realities that come out of the world that we live in. Other things, borders that we draw around our property, our cities, our provinces, our countries. Boy, do we take human borders seriously. We'll kill and die to protect those borders. But any one of you knows the rest of nature couldn't care less about human borders. They're human constructs, and nature doesn't pay attention to human boundaries. We construct concepts like capitalism, like the economy, like corporations or the market. My God, just listen to people talk about the market. The market, yes, free the market. Let the market do its thing. We invented the damn thing. But look at the papers and read the papers. Market's not feeling too good today. You know, you think the market is this thing with an ice compact on its head saying, I feel shitty today. Like, what the hell? 400 years ago, we believed in dragons, right? And people got really worried. If they thought the dragons were mad at us, we'd give them jewels and gold and sacrifice virgins. We did anything to placate the dragon. Well, now we know that nobody believes in dragons. I mean, they're a construct of the human mind. And yet we then replace that construct with another human construct, the economy. It doesn't make sense to me. We can't change the laws of nature. We can't get nature to fit human agendas. But what we can do is modify human behavior and the human constructs to fit with nature. We're doing everything backwards right now. We debate over pipelines or nuclear energy or whatever on the basis of their economic possibilities. But we're doing it all wrong. We've got to modify that so that our economies fit the reality of the world that we live in. So you're fighting, I believe, for those values, to get the discussion back onto the foundation of these fundamental things. And I hope that you continue to fight that, because you're fighting, as far as I can see, for what you've already been promised in treaties that have been signed. You're fighting for the things for as long as the sun shines, as the wind blows, and the rivers flow. And I'm with you all the way. Thank you very much.